The narrator of the story is Heather, a rich woman, 50 age, with a bob haircut and a pearl necklace. I dried my hands on my apron, still warm from the stove, and reached for the phone. The screen glowed with our family group chat. The Eunice Crew. Benjamin had named it years ago. Back when he was still the kind of son who called twice a day to say hi, Mom. The message was short, almost polite. We think it's best if you keep some distance for a while. We're going through a rough time and need a little space. I read it once, then again, the words refused to make sense. My heart beat faster as if trying to erase what my eyes already knew. Then I saw it. Right beneath his message, a blue thumbs up from Vivian. Such a simple icon. A meaningless flick of a finger. Yet it was as final, as brutal as a door slammed shut in the face of someone who once lived inside. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, phone in hand, the jam bubbling higher behind me until it hissed and spat onto the stove. The kitchen smelled of sugar and smoke. A rough time. What kind of rough time? The kind that erases a mother. The air grew thick, my breath shallow. My first instinct was to call him, to ask what I had done wrong, to smooth it over like I always did. Mothers are trained from birth to mend, to soften the blow, to make sure everyone else's heart stays intact except their own. Then, from somewhere deep inside, a cold steadiness began to rise. I put the phone down gently, as though setting down a weapon. I turned off the stove, the jam, my grandmother's recipe cooled into silence. I sat at the table, the one with a notch in the corner from where Benjamin once swung his toy hammer too hard. My hand brushed over that small scar in the wood. 30 years of single motherhood. 30 years of double shifts at the sewing factory. 30 years of giving, forgiving, and shrinking myself to fit their comfort. And all of it reduced to a single, sanitized dismissal. We need space. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. And then, below Benjamin's message, that hateful blue thumbs up stared back like a smirk. Vivian. I had spent years convincing myself she just needed time. That her clipped tone and tight smiles were signs of shyness, not disdain. That when she said you don't have to come every weekend, she meant rest. You deserve it. But now I saw it every cool glance, every awkward pause. Every conversation abruptly ended when I entered the room. All the pieces clicked into place with a terrible clarity. It wasn't distance they wanted, it was erasure. Something inside me, something I had kept buried beneath patience and politeness, began to stir. I picked up my phone again, my hands suddenly steady, as if guided by something larger than anger. My voice, when I spoke aloud, surprised me with its calmness. All right, Benjamin, you want space? I typed, understood, Benjamin. I'll respect your request. And I'll also stop paying the $3,200 monthly mortgage, the $5,000 transfers, and Sophie's $890 health insurance. I hope you both find the space you need. Love, Mom. I reread it. Every word was a scalpel precise, necessary, surgical. Then I pressed send. The sound of that tiny whoosh was almost holy. For a moment, the world was utterly still. Then, like a dam breaking, I began to shake. My hands trembled, my breath came in short bursts, and tears fell onto the phone screen. Not soft tears, the kind that burn, the kind that carry the salt of decades. When I looked up, the sunlight had shifted. My kitchen, once warm and golden, now looked unfamiliar, harsher, colder. I rose and went to the stove. The pot of jam sat there, thick and glistening, its sweetness mocking me. I lifted it carefully, walked to the sink, and poured it down the drain. It made a thick, sticky sound, like the past refusing to go quietly. As the last of it slid away, I whispered, no more. That night, my phone buzzed endlessly. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, the desperate percussion of panic. I turned it face down and left it on the coffee table. The silence that followed was the loudest I'd ever heard. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the old armchair by the window, the one that had molded itself perfectly to my back over the years. Outside, the autumn wind played with the dry leaves, chasing them down the empty street. I remembered Benjamin as a little boy, his laughter echoing through this same house, his tiny hands sticky from jam, his face lighting up when I kissed his forehead. How easily love turns into labor and labor into debt. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, it was nearly midnight. My phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. I glanced at it. 12 missed calls from Benjamin, 2 from Vivian, 1 from my sister Martha. No, not tonight. Tonight was mine. I walked out to the porch. The night air was crisp, the kind that smells faintly of wood smoke and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The stars above were sharp and cold, indifferent to my little heartbreak. And yet, for the first time in years, I felt strangely free. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around me and whispered into the night, "Love without respect doesn't nourish anyone. It only depletes the giver." Inside, the phone buzzed again. I didn't answer. The next morning, I woke to a dozen new messages, pleas, justifications, confusion. Benjamin wrote, "Mom, why would you do that? Can we talk?" Vivian's tone was sharper. "This isn't fair. You can't just cut us off like that." "Oh, but I could." Their panic didn't fill me with triumph. It filled me with quiet certainty. It's the kind you feel when the fog finally lifts, revealing the truth that had been there all along. I knew this wasn't the end. It was the opening act of something larger, something inevitable. For years I had confused giving with loving, obedience with peace. I had thought that to be a good mother meant to endure. Now I was beginning to understand that sometimes love demands you stop saving people from the consequences of what they've done to you. That was the night I stopped being their provider and started becoming my own person again. And as I sat at my kitchen table, the faint smell of burned sugar still lingering in the air, I realized something else. The hardest goodbyes are not the ones shouted in anger. They're the ones whispered through a text message and signed with a single silent thumbs up. What I didn't know then was that the thumbs up wasn't just the end of something. It was the beginning of my education in power. Morning light spilled across my kitchen table, turning the steam from my coffee into ghostly ribbons that curled and vanished before my eyes. The phone sat where I had left it, face down, quiet now. The previous night's storm of messages had gone still like a battlefield after the smoke clears. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thumbs up again, bright and indifferent, floating in the dark like a smirk. Yet the ache that had crushed my chest yesterday had changed overnight. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy. Dull slow rust eating through old metal. That's when I started to think back about how all of this dependence, this invisible kagi, had built it myself. $1, one favor, one apology at a time. The rust began 6 years earlier. Benjamin called me one Saturday morning, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "She's incredible. Her name's Vivian." He sounded so full of hope, it pulled a smile out of me before I could even think. I still remember glancing out the kitchen window, the maple tree dancing in the spring wind, and thinking, he's finally happy again. When he brought her over for dinner, she was all polish of her hair in place, pearls at her throat, that expensive perfume that smells faintly of money and control. Vivian had the kind of smile that seemed rehearsed, a soft curve of lips with nothing behind it. But when she said, "It's such an honor to meet the woman who raised Benjamin alone," my heart fluttered like an old flag catching a gust. She called me an inspiration. Those words are a narcotic to lonely people. The first few months were sweet. She brought flowers on weekends, asked about my recipes, even helped me knead dough once. I remember her laughing, flower on her cheek, her eyes bright with something that looked like kindness. Looking back, I think it was curiosity. She was studying me, measuring the depth of the well. Then came the first request. "Vivian wants to take this business course." Benjamin said one evening on the phone. "It's a great opportunity, but the tuition is steep." I didn't even let him finish. "How much?" $800. I had that much in my savings. I wired it that same afternoon, my heart light. A mother's joy is always tangled with the act of giving. But once you open the door to generosity, people start believing it's a hallway. The requests grew like weeds. $2,500 for a new refrigerator. $1,200 for car repairs. $3,000 to cover a few unexpected bills. Each time, Benjamin's voice carried that same note of hesitation. And each time I answered before he could finish. Of course, sweetheart. That's what mothers do. I started skipping little things, my hairdresser, the good groceries, the quilting club I loved. It felt noble at first, like I was silently investing in their happiness. But soon, I began to notice that my life was shrinking, quietly, like fabric pulled too long in the wash. The real blow came the day they announced they'd found the perfect house. Vivian showed me the glossy brochure over dinner. Her eyes glittered when she said, "We just need a little help with the down payment." The number she mentioned, $95,000, hit me like cold water. Nearly everything I had left from the land my late husband had worked until the day he died. I hesitated just for a breath. I remember how the candlelight flickered between us, the faint hum of the refrigerator, Benjamin's hopeful expression. His eyes as father's eyes, pleading silently for me to say yes. So I did, and with that one decision, I funded my own disappearance. The temporary help became permanent. First, the mortgage payments. Just until Vivian gets that promotion, then the monthly transfers $3,000, $4,000, and eventually $5,000, so they could maintain stability. Stability became the god we all worshipped in silence. I began to live cheaply. No more dinners out, no new clothes, fewer doctor visits. I told myself it was fine. I had what I needed. I had them. But slowly, the calls stopped. The Sunday lunches vanished. My texts went unanswered for days. One afternoon, I called to ask if I could visit. Vivian's tone was polite, the kind of politeness that cuts. "Oh, this weekend's tough," she said. "Sophie has ballet, and we're trying to build our own routine, you know." "Course," I replied, my throat dry. "I understand. When Sophie was born, I arrived with a hand-knit blanket. Vivian thanked me stiffly, then asked me not to post any pictures online for privacy. I sat there on the edge of their new designer sofa, holding my granddaughter for barely a minute before Vivian excused herself to put the baby down. That night, Benjamin texted, "Thanks for stopping by. Mom, Vivian's just tired." I stared at the words, thumb hovering over the keyboard, before I finally typed, "No problem, sweetheart. Give her my love." Then I put the phone down and cried until dawn. The turning point came with something as ordinary as a dinner invitation. 3 weeks before the message that ended everything, Benjamin called. "Come over, Mom," he said. "Vivian's making dinner. Sophie's been asking for you." I nearly skipped down the sidewalk that evening, carrying my lemon pie and a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford. I wore my best blouse and even put on lipstick, humming as I climbed their porch steps. Vivian opened the door in sweatpants, her hair in a messy bun. "Oh," she said, blinking at the pie. "You didn't have to bring that. We ordered pizza." I laughed softly, trying not to show my confusion. "I just thought I'd make something special." She smiled thinly. "Well, you know, sometimes people show love in different ways. Not everyone likes to overdo it." I sat at their dining table, feeling the air between us thicken. She launched into a conversation about suffocating parents, speaking as if I weren't there. Benjamin kept quiet, staring at his plate. When I left that night, he walked me to the car. I wanted him to say something, anything, but the only words he managed were, "Did you transfer the money this month?" "Ah!" I nodded. "Yes." He hugged me quickly and went back inside. That was when I finally understood. I wasn't family anymore. I was infrastructure. Now, sitting in my kitchen years later, I traced the rim of my coffee cup with one finger. The rust hadn't started suddenly. It had crept in, silent and patient, corroding the metal from the inside out. Every mother thinks she's immune. Every mother believes her sacrifices are investments that will one day pay back in love. I had paid in full. What I hadn't realized then was that rust doesn't stop on its own. You have to scrape it off, even if it means tearing a bit of yourself away with it. And soon, I would. The night I overheard the word burden, the scraping began. The days after that dinner invitation blurred together like smudged glass. Work, laundry, the same quiet house, the same empty calendar. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the front porch felt louder now, as if the walls were reminding me how alone I'd become. Benjamin's texts were brief and transactional. Mortgage due Friday. Thanks. Or Vivian said Sophie's insurance went up again. I told myself it was temporary. People get busy. Families go through phases. But deep down, I knew. It's become a subscription service with a pulse. Still, I kept sending the money. Mothers can endure almost anything, except the idea of being needed no more. One Thursday evening, Vivian called. Her tone was clipped, polite like she was scheduling a haircut. Benjamin's been stressed, she said. Maybe you could help ease things a bit this month? How much? I asked automatically. Well, with the renovations, maybe. It's an extra 2,000 renovations. Oh, the kitchen. You know how old it was? We're redoing it, new granite, open shelving, the works. We'll invite you to see it once it's all done. Her words struck like sugar-coated darts. Invite you to see it. I smiled into the receiver, though she couldn't see me. Of course, I'll transfer it tonight. When I hung up, I sat very still. My kitchen paint peeling, cabinet handles loose. The same linoleum from 1984 looked like a stranger's house. I traced the worn edges of my table and whispered, "Granite, huh?" The next weekend, I saw the pictures online. Vivian had posted them publicly, her gleaming new counters, the pendant lights, a caption that read, "Finally making our house a home. Hard work pays off. No mention of me." Not that I expected any. Still, it stung the way she'd cropped Benjamin out of one photo. The way she stood in the center, glass of champagne raised like a victory flag. That's when I started saving screenshots. I had it. A quiet act of defiance. A few months later came the dinner. It was late summer, the air heavy with the scent of cut grass and asphalt. I remember because I'd baked all-day fresh lemons, real butter, the flaky crust Benjamin used to love as a boy. I wanted to bring a piece of memory to the table, a peace offering made of sugar and nostalgia. When Vivian opened the door, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're early," she said. "Half an hour," I replied, lifting the pie. "I thought I could help in the kitchen." She hesitated, then stepped aside. The air inside was thick with the scent of takeout pizza. Benjamin sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. "Oh," I said lightly. "I thought you were cooking." Vivian waved a hand. "Too tired." Sophie wanted pizza. I set the pie on the counter, its golden crust still warm. Vivian glanced at it as though I'd brought her an uninvited guest. "That's sweet," she said. Though we're trying to cut down on sugar, I swallowed hard. Just thought Ben might like Mom. Benjamin interrupted without looking up. "Could you transfer the usual tonight?" "The mortgage auto debits tomorrow." The words landed with a dull thud. "No, thank you." "No, how are you?" "Just business." Vivian leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "We've actually been meaning to talk to you," she said, "about the way you get involved." My pulse quickened. Involved. She sighed dramatically. "You have such a big heart, but sometimes it's a bit much. The surprise visits, the constant baking, it's overwhelming." I looked at Benjamin, searching for backup. His eyes darted away. Vivian went on. "You raised an amazing man, truly. But he's an adult now. We're trying to build our own rhythm. You understand?" My voice trembled. "I do." "I just thought, that's exactly it," she said, smiling tightly. "You think too much about us. You should think about yourself more." For a moment, the room tilted. I stared at the pie on the counter, the one that used to mean comfort, not intrusion. My throat ached. Benjamin finally spoke. "She's just saying we need space, Mom. You've done so much already." I nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "Of course, I wouldn't want to." "Intrude," Vivian touched my arm, all false warmth. "If you're not intruding, dear." just learning boundaries. It's healthy. Healthy. The word stung like lemon juice on a cut. The rest of the evening passed in awkward fragments. Sophie toddled through the living room, sticky with pizza sauce. I tried to catch her, to wipe her hands, but Vivian gently intercepted. It's okay, she's fine. Every act of love denied. Every small tenderness fenced off. When I finally stood to leave, Benjamin walked me to the door. He hugged me quickly, the way you might hug a relative you barely know. As I stepped into the cool night, he said, almost absently, "Did you transfer the money yet?" I froze. The streetlight threw his face into half-shadowed his father's jawline, his eyes tired but distant. "Yes," I said softly. "I did. Thanks, Mom," he murmured, already turning back inside. I watched the door close behind him. The porch light clicked off before I reached the sidewalk. I drove home in silence, the pie still sitting on the passenger seat, untouched. The smell of lemon and butter filled the car until it made me nauseous. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't even bother to bring it inside. I carried it straight to the trash bin and dropped it in. The crust broke open, spilling its golden filling like a wound. Standing there under the yellow porch light, I whispered, "Enough." It wasn't anger then. It was grief. It's the slow, devastating grief of realizing you have been loving people who only saw your value in numbers. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and went through my bank app. I scrolled past every transfer, every line that bore their names. The total was dizzying. My fingers trembled. That's when I started printing them each statement, each receipt. I stacked them neatly in a folder, labeled it Household Assistance, a name polite enough to hide its truth. 2 days later, Benjamin texted again. "Sorry about dinner. Viv's stressed. We appreciate everything you do." A peace offering, if you could call it that. I typed back, "Of course, love you both." But I didn't send it. Not yet. I stared at the words, then deleted them, letter by letter, until nothing remained. Then I put the phone down and whispered to the empty room. "You'll learn what appreciation means." 3 days later. I walked into their house, uninvited. What I heard in that silence burned through whatever love I had left. The knock on the door was soft, almost polite, but I didn't need an invitation. I had a purpose, now a quiet burning curiosity that would no longer be ignored. I had baked a small doll for Sophie, a hand-sewn replica of the one she had hugged the first time I visited her in the hospital. I wanted to leave it on the doorstep, a token of love, a gesture she could enjoy without Vivian intercepting it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Their house was quiet, eerily so. Usually Sophie's laughter or Vivian's high-pitched voice would drift through the rooms like smoke. But tonight, silence reigned. I moved carefully, keeping to the shadows, just as I had done when Benjamin was a boy playing hide-and-seek. My heart thumped softly, a nervous echo. From the kitchen, I heard a voice soft, restrained, yet sharp in its disdain. "Mom," Vivian said, though it was clearly on speakerphone. "You have no idea how much we've had to put up with. She's our burden, not the other way around. I can't stand that woman anymore. She pays for things and thinks that gives her the right to control us." My chest froze. Burden. The word fell like a stone, heavy and jagged. Then Benjamin's voice, weak, hesitant, a shadow of the boy who used to ask me to kiss his scraped knee. "You should be more patient." "She's lonely, Viv. She's just lonely. Either she understands and keeps her distance," Vivian snapped, "or we'll have to be more direct." I stood rooted to the hallway, clutching the doll I had made, my mind shattering like porcelain. The warmth I had felt for Benjamin all my life, the pride, the protection, the sleepless nights, the tiny victories boiled down to a burden. My sacrifices, my love, my life savings, every dollar and every ounce of care weighed against their convenience. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. I could no longer pretend. The slow rust, the invisible erosion I had endured for years, had reached its conclusion. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, the doll in front of me, like a talisman, and began to catalog everything. The mortgage, the transfers, the down payment, all of it. I tallied the amounts meticulously, each entry a beat in a ledger of love transformed into exploitation. The sum was staggering, $267,000 over 3 years, not counting the initial down payment on their house. A number so large it made my chest ache, not just for the loss, but for the betrayal. I wasn't a woman without power. I had simply been giving it away. The next morning, I met with Henry, my lawyer. He was a calm man, methodical, with gray temples that reminded me of my own reflection in the mirror. I laid out the bank statements, the screenshots, the texts. "This is more than documentation," I told him, my voice steady, though the memory of the word burden still burned in my chest. This is a pattern. Every transfer, every request. "They think love is a credit line." Henry nodded slowly. "Legally, your options are limited. You can't reclaim the house, but you can stop giving, and you can ensure the repayments of any informal loans or gifts that were agreed upon. You have a case for restitution." Restitution. The word felt like a warm sun on frostbitten skin. Not revenge, not anger, but justice measured and undeniable. Over the next few days, I prepared. I drafted the texts carefully, each sentence precise, each word deliberate. Not a scream, not a lecture, not a plea, just the truth. I didn't have to raise my voice. The law and the ledger would speak for me. I went through my routines methodically, cleaning the kitchen, baking bread that I would eat alone, organizing my sewing room. Every action was deliberate, a practice in composure. And yet, beneath it all, the ember of anger glowed steadily. Not the frenzied fire of retaliation, but the slow, white heat of someone who has been wronged and now knows exactly how to act. On the 4th day, I sent the first text. "Understood, Benjamin. I will respect your request for distance. Effective immediately. I will also stop all financial transfers, mortgage payments, and contributions to Sophie's expenses. I hope this space gives you both clarity. Love, Mom." I hit send and set the phone face down. Then I went to the stove, picked up a jar of homemade jam pumpkin, spiced. The recipe from my grandmother, and poured it all into the sink. The thick orange liquid swirled and disappeared, like the past I had sacrificed so willingly. For hours, I sat in silence. The phone remained untouched, buzzing occasionally with missed calls and texts. I didn't answer. Some part of me expected panic, maybe a knock at the door, maybe tears or apologies. Nothing came immediately. And that, I realized, was part of the lesson. They had learned nothing in the past. They would learn now, on my terms. The quiet hours stretched into days. When Benjamin finally showed up at my doorstep, it was not with anger, but with collapse. His eyes, once full of boyish hope, were hollow, and he leaned against the doorframe as though the weight of everything had finally crushed him. I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice cracked. We didn't realize. Vivian. I held the door open, stepping aside. He walked in, and I let him feel the emptiness that had grown in my life. "I forgive you," I said softly, "but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." And then I laid down the terms: repayment plan, controlled access to Sophie, an end to financial support. Okay, contract? Clear. Non-negotiable. He nodded, defeated, and signed. That night, after he left, I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. The word burden lingered in my mind, not like a wound, but like a marker, a signpost pointing me to the truth I had ignored for years. Love without respect is not love at all. I had survived the slow rust, and in its place had built something stronger. Boundaries, dignity, self-respect. The ember of anger cooled into a quiet flame. The rust had been exposed, the ledger completed, and the truth spoken. Yet one final act of reckoning was still waiting, and it would arrive quietly, like a shadow passing across the room. The morning after overhearing Vivian's call, the world felt sharper. Every sound, every shadow, every corner of my home seemed to reflect the truth I had been avoiding for years. Love without respect is invisible. And I had been invisible for far too long. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, the doll for Sophie lying beside my cup. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the thrill of clarity. I wasn't the helpless mother anymore. I wasn't a human ATM or a ghostly presence tolerated at best. I had a role to reclaim. Creditor. I opened my laptop and began pulling together every piece of evidence I had gathered over the years. Bank statements showing transfers, both scheduled and spontaneous. Receipts for gifts, appliances, tuition payments, and every little just because expense I had funded. Screenshots of texts where Benjamin and Vivian had asked for more promised repayment or made excuses. Each file I saved felt like a brick added to the foundation of something solid, something I could finally call power. Henry, my lawyer, arrived that afternoon. He was quiet, precise, the kind of man who didn't need theatrics to make a point. I spread the papers across the dining room table. This, I said, pointing to the spreadsheet I had created, is everything. Every dollar, every request, every promise broken. It's not just money. It's my life they've treated like a ledger. And now it's time to turn the tables. Henry nodded, scanning the documents with a professional eye. Legally, you have options. You can stop all ongoing support immediately, which is obvious. You also have documented informal loans. That gives us leverage to demand repayment. I exhaled slowly. I'm done being invisible. Accountability, and I want them to feel in some way the weight of what they've taken for granted. He looked at me steadily. This isn't revenge, it's strategy, precision. You're not screaming at them, you're handing them their choices and your boundaries. That's where power lives. I spent the next few days drafting my messages. Each word was deliberate. No rage, no pleading, just fact and consequence. Effective immediately, all financial support is suspended. The mortgage, transfers, and insurance contributions will cease. A repayment schedule for past contributions will be discussed via legal channels. Access to Sophie will be structured and agreed upon mutually, respecting the child's well-being and my rights as her grandmother. I read it aloud multiple times. Each sentence carried a quiet gravity, like a gavel striking down the invisible rule they had imposed on me for years. The final preparation wasn't just legal, it was ritualistic. I baked bread for myself, tea simmered on the stove, the morning sunlight spilling across my kitchen. I wanted to feel human, again solid, grounded, untouchable. I gathered the jars of jam, the old pie tins, the little trinkets I had once carried over to their house with hope in my chest. One by one, I placed them in the sink and poured boiling water over them. The smell of sugar and butter boiled into the air, acrid and cleansing. With each item I destroyed, I imagined the weight lifting from my shoulders, the endless debt of expectation. The emotional labor, the silent humiliation. I didn't feel angry. I felt free. Then came the day I hit send. Benjamin's text had arrived earlier that morning, polite as ever. Mom, we've been trying. Can we talk? I glanced at the message and let it sit there. Few hours later, I typed my carefully prepared text, pasted from the draft I had rehearsed. Understood, Benjamin. I will respect your request for distance. Effective immediately, all financial support, transfers, and contributions are suspended. Please note that a repayment schedule for past assistance will be discussed via legal channels. Access to Sophie will be structured in a way that respects both her well-being and my rights as her grandmother. I hovered over the send button for a long moment, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't known in decades. Then, with a click, the message left my phone and entered their world. I placed the phone face down and didn't look at it again. The hours that followed were a curious mixture of silence and anticipation. I imagined Vivian pacing the house, checking her phone obsessively. Benjamin muttering excuses, guilt, and confusion. But the magic of it was this. I didn't chase. I didn't answer, just waited. It was a slow detonation, one that didn't scream but shook everything from within. 3 days later, the truth began to leak out, unfiltered. Martha, my sister, called me over in a flurry of excitement and indignation. "Axa," she said, eyes wide. "You weren't imagining it. Vivian and Benjamin. They've been planning to remodel the guest room. $35,000. A dressing room. They wanted to do it while keeping you at a distance, your generosity, your love. It was the funding." I listened, a quiet fury settling in my chest, tempered by the knowledge that this was why I had prepared, why I had waited. "You see," Martha said, shaking her head, "they thought you'd never stop giving, that you'd just keep going, like some sort of charity." I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. The ledger, the texts, the months of preparation, they would speak louder than any words I could offer. And then Benjamin arrived. Not with threats, not with anger. It's just himself, diminished, worn, human at last. He came to the door, eyes red, body leaning against the frame as if the weight of the last 6 years had finally broken him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know. Vivian." I opened the door fully, letting him step inside. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I let the silence speak. "I forgive you," I said, soft and steady. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I laid out the terms, a legally binding repayment schedule for all contributions, both large and small. Structured consistent access to Sophie under my conditions. Complete cessation of financial requests or dependence, he signed. Without hesitation, without bargaining. And in that moment, the slow rust of the past was replaced by a foundation I had rebuilt with my own hands. That night, I sat in my chair by the window. The autumn wind played with the dry leaves, a sound I now heard differently, not lonely, but alive. I traced the rim of my cup, and for the first time in years, I smiled without effort. The ledger of loss had been completed. Justice had been quietly served. My home, my kitchen, my life all mine again. The ember of anger had cooled to a controlled flame. The slow, tight, strategic detonation had unfolded perfectly. And for the first time, I felt peace. I had become my own authority. But the reckoning wasn't over, not entirely. There was one last act of truth waiting to unfold, and it would reveal more than just money. It would reveal character. The morning was quiet, almost fragile, the kind of silence that stretches a room into eternity. I poured my tea and sat at the kitchen table, fingers brushing the edge of the mug, feeling its warmth seep into my hands. The house smelled faintly of bread I had baked the night before, and sunlight slanted through the curtains like golden bars. The phone sat beside me. In the past, it had been a lifeline, a portal into their world. Now it felt different, to tether to a place where I had been invisible for far too long. I looked at it for several long minutes. The messages from Benjamin and Vivian had accumulated in the early hours. Little pings of concern, confusion, thinly veiled panic. "Mom, please answer. It's urgent. We need to talk. Something's wrong." I didn't move. I didn't reach. The calm before the storm was intoxicating. I thought back to the weeks, months, and years that had led here. The small loans, the down payment, the transfers that had become routine. I had been careful, meticulous, generous to the point of erasure. Every act of love had been measured against their convenience, every gift and sacrifice used as evidence that I could be counted on, not cherished. Now it was time to reclaim my narrative. I tapped out the text I had drafted with Henry. Not a scream, not a confrontation, just the facts, precise and undeniable. Benjamin. Vivian, effective immediately. All financial support, mortgage payments, and contributions toward Sophie's expenses will cease. Any further transactions will not be made. A repayment schedule for past contributions will be established through legal channels. Access to Sophie will be structured with mutual respect and her well-being as priority. This is non-negotiable. I read it aloud once, twice, feeling the syllables fall like measured beats on a drum. Then I hit send. I didn't wait for replies. I set the phone face down on the table and turned to the window, watching sunlight fall across my garden. The small blooms nodded in the breeze, unbothered by human drama. And that was the beginning of the silence. The texts and calls began within minutes. Pings and rings tore through the quiet, a frantic staccato that reminded me of distant thunderstorms. Benjamin, Vivian, even Sophie's daycare number mistakenly left in their contact list all chimed insistently. But I did not answer. I did not look. The urgency in those messages was palpable even without reading them. I imagined Vivian pacing the living room, phone in hand, muttering threats and excuses. Benjamin trying to mediate, stumbling over words, confused and afraid. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a flicker of recognition, the realization that his mother had been exploited and finally refused to be so. I stayed seated, still as a statue, letting the storm pass outside and inside their world. 2 hours later, the first message came through. "Mom, please. This isn't like you. Talk to me." I closed my eyes and let it sit there. My chest ached, but it was a different ache, now one of ownership, of self-possession. I imagined the house they had rebuilt on my generosity, the kitchen with granite counters, the dressing room Vivian had fantasized about. I imagined all the times I had swallowed disappointment, smiled at snubs, endured their casual cruelty. None of it mattered anymore. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap. Water ran in a steady stream, warm and insistent, and I scrubbed my hands until they tingled. It was almost ceremonial washing off years of servitude and erasure. By late afternoon, the panic had escalated. I glanced at the phone. 42 missed calls, 73 messages, several voicemails left in a jittery, trembling tone. Benjamin's voice was shaky. Vivian's sharp and clipped, demanding explanations, pleading, sometimes even sobbing. But I did not move. I drank my tea slowly, one deliberate sip at a time. Each missed call, each unread text, was a drumbeat of accountability reverberating in the space I had carved for myself. I had learned something powerful. The absence of response was more potent than confrontation. Silence, carefully maintained, is its own form of justice. That evening, Vivian tried a new tactic. A single text arrived, deceptively calm. "Mom, Sophie misses you. Please don't push us away. We love you." I held the phone in my hand, reading and rereading the words. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I could have replied. I could have begged forgiveness or explained myself, but I did not. Instead, I placed the phone back on the table, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. I turned to Sophie's doll on the counter, brushing the seam where the thread had frayed. Her tiny, stitched hands reached toward me in silent encouragement. I am choosing love on my own terms, I thought, not the terms they demand. The first night passed with no contact. The next morning, I checked my account not out of curiosity, but necessity. No transfers had been requested. No automated payments were processed. My power, once scattered and invisible, was suddenly tangible. Henry had advised me to remain consistent, to enforce the boundaries I had established. I felt a strange exhilaration, like walking on ice that I knew would hold me. And for the first time in years, I slept without dread. Over the following week, I began receiving emails that were more formal, less emotional. Vivian tried to manipulate with legal-sounding language. Benjamin sent apologetic notes, but all of it fell flat. The fortress I had built, the ledger, the text, my refusal to engage, held firm. I realized something extraordinary. Silence can be louder than shouting. I could feel them twisting inside their own realization. Panic, guilt, and frustration made their presence unbearable. They had been used to control and compliance. Now they faced inertia and boundaries, and it unsettled them more than any argument ever could. I spent my mornings in my garden, afternoons in the sewing room, and evenings on the balcony, painting. I returned to the life I had neglected while pouring my energy into theirs. Each moment, each act of self-care, was a quiet detonation proof that I was no longer a passive player in their narrative. And then, after 10 days of silence, Benjamin arrived at my door, alone. No Vivian this time, no scripted excuses, just a man humbled by consequence. I see now, he whispered. I didn't realize. We've been wrong. I'm sorry truly. I let him inside, letting the quiet fill the space between us. I spoke only once. I forgive you, but forgiveness is not forgetting. And it does not erase boundaries. He nodded, and we began to discuss a repayment plan, structured access to Sophie, and the terms of our future interactions. I listened, composed and calm, knowing the silence had done more than I ever could have with words. The silence had spoken volumes. But there was still one reckoning left, a confrontation that would reveal the full weight of truth and the consequences of underestimating a mother's love. The next morning, the air smelled of rain and fallen leaves, crisp and bitter. I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight catching the silver streaks in my hair, the world outside waking slowly, while mine had already shifted. The ledger, the texts, the months of preparation, it all led here, to this reckoning. It began quietly, as all true reckonings do. Martha called first. Her voice trembled, part excitement, part disbelief. "Axa, you weren't imagining it." The dressing room Vivian planned. $35,000, all while keeping you at arm's length. They thought your generosity was endless. I exhaled slowly, calm as the tide, letting her words settle around me. Every whispered detail confirmed what I had long suspected. My sacrifices had been weaponized. My love treated as currency. "They're panicking now," Martha said. "Benjamin doesn't know which way is up. And Vivian, she's furious. So they didn't expect you to stop." I nodded silently. That was the point. I didn't need to intervene. The slow detonation of my boundaries had done the work for me. By mid-morning, Benjamin arrived. Alone. No Vivian this time. It's just him. Weathered and worn. The weight of truth pressing down on his shoulders. I don't know what to say," he murmured, leaning against the doorframe like a man carrying a lifetime of guilt. "Vivian, she." I didn't understand. I gestured for him to sit. "You don't need to justify her actions. You need to understand yours. What it's done to me." He flinched, as though the words themselves had physical weight. I let him feel it. I didn't speak again immediately. Silence is heavier than explanation, and the ledger of loss had already been delivered. I've been wrong," he whispered finally. "All this time I didn't see. I took it for granted. You gave everything, and I didn't even notice." I nodded slowly. "That is why there is a repayment schedule and structured access to Sophie. This is not just about money. This is about respect, accountability, and boundaries. You cannot rebuild what you have broken with words alone." While Benjamin sat there, visibly crumbling, the legal notices began to arrive. The bank sent letters regarding their mortgage, overdue notices that had suddenly gone unpaid. Vivian's carefully curated house, once a showcase of her control and vanity, began to crumble under the absence of my contributions. Every email, every phone call, every formal notice became a reflection of reality she could not deny. She had expected compliance, passivity, the soft bending of a mother's heart to her will. Instead, she faced consequence, immediate and undeniable. Benjamin's phone buzzed incessantly with Vivian's frantic messages, each more desperate than the last. But he remained in my kitchen, grounded and accountable. "You'll have to face her eventually," I said softly. "But for now, let her experience what it feels like when her plans unravel without the support she counted on. Let her see that actions have consequences." Days passed. Vivian tried everything. Charm, threats, manipulation. It's called. Left voicemails, texted messages meant to twist guilt like a knife. Yet I did not respond. Benjamin called once or twice to check in, and I reminded him gently that he had my forgiveness, but also boundaries. Meanwhile, the house they had built with my money-lavish counters, luxury closets, all the trappings of success was now a tangible monument to their miscalculation. Mortgage payments were late, utilities went unpaid, and the first notices of foreclosure began to trickle in. I didn't celebrate, not in a joyous way, but I watched. with the calm of someone who had done everything in their power to protect herself and had now allowed justice to arrive naturally. One afternoon, Benjamin returned. This time, his face was pale, eyes red from sleepless nights. He held my hands, trembling. I've never realized how much you gave, how much you sacrificed. I'm so sorry, Mom. Truly, I listened, and for the first time in years, I felt relief, not relief from pain, but from clarity. He saw me. He understood what had been invisible for so long. I forgive you, I said softly, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it does not remove the need for accountability. That house, the money, the patterns, they must be corrected. He nodded. Yes, I understand. I will do everything to fix this. I'll sell the house. I'll pay back what I owe. And Sophie, see you? Properly. On your terms. That was all I needed to hear. The rest, the legalities, the repayment schedule, would follow. My boundaries had been enforced, and Benjamin's eyes reflected the weight of his learning. In the days that followed, the world began to stabilize. The house was listed for sale. Vivian, furious and frustrated, tried to assert control, but without my contributions, without Benjamin's full complicity, her power was gone. Her plans crumbled like sand through fingers. Benjamin called consistently, not asking for anything, not trying to manipulate, just speaking as a son reconnecting with his mother. And Sophie, my Sophie, was finally able to spend Saturdays at my home, bake cookies with me, sew dolls, and experience a love untethered by expectation or exploitation. It was a quiet victory, not loud, not dramatic, but profound. That night I sat on my balcony, the city lights flickering below. My hands rested on my knees, and for the first time in decades I felt a complete stillness. No dread, no guilt, no obligation, only peace. I reflected on the months of preparation, the slow burning awareness of my value, and the ultimate reckoning that had arrived without a single scream, without a confrontation. Justice, I realized, is often quiet. It does not need fireworks to be complete. It needs only clarity, boundaries, and the courage to enforce them. The house, the money, the years of emotional labor, they all had a cost. But they also had a lesson I now embodied fully. Love is not measured by sacrifice alone. Love without respect is not love, is an invisible cage. And sometimes, to protect the heart, you must close that cage door and keep it firmly shut. The reckoning had arrived, the truth spoken, and the consequences unfolding. But there remained one final chapter, a reflection on love, freedom, and the life I had reclaimed. Only then would the story truly find its peace. The morning sunlight spilled across my balcony, golden and gentle, as if the world itself were exhaling with me. I held a cup of tea, its warmth seeping into my hands, and let my eyes drift across the city below. The chaos of the last year, the betrayal, the slow rust, the calculated detonation felt like a distant storm now. The air was still. My home, my life, finally belonged to me again. Sophie's laughter echoed faintly in the distance. She had spent the night, as she often did now, free from the interference and manipulation that had clouded her earliest years. She and I had baked cookies that morning, the smell of chocolate and vanilla filling the small kitchen, the aroma a reminder of traditions we could finally reclaim for ourselves. I traced the rim of my teacup, thinking of Benjamin. He had come a long way from the distracted, almost invisible son I had known. The man who once let Vivian's ambition blind him to everything I had done. Now he respected the boundaries I had set, and more importantly, he understood their necessity. The contract we had drawn up, legally binding, clear and fair, sat in my drawer. It outlined repayment schedules for past financial support, structured access to Sophie, and a firm cessation of any further monetary dependency. I had explained it simply. This is not punishment. It is clarity. It ensures that love is not a transaction, that our relationships are based on respect, not debt. Benjamin had signed without resistance. The look in his eyes, then the relief, the sorrow. The understanding was one of the rare moments in life when words cannot do justice. It was enough to know that he had finally seen me, truly seen me, not just as a mother but as a human deserving dignity. Sophie ran into the room, holding the small doll I had sewn for her months ago. Her eyes sparkled with the kind of unguarded happiness that only a child can have, untouched by cynicism or disappointment. "Grandma," she said, holding the doll out to me, "can we make it a dress?" I smiled and took the tiny fabric into my hands, my fingers gentle but firm. "Of course, sweetheart. We can do anything we want." Her laughter filled the space, and I realized that this was the first time in years I had felt unpressured, untangled from obligations that had never been mine to bear. My love for Sophie was free, not shackled by expectation or exploitation. I reflected on the lessons learned. For decades, I had equated love with giving, with sacrifice, with compliance. Every transfer, every gift, every moment spent bending to Benjamin and Vivian's will had felt like proof of devotion. And every time I had lost a little more of myself. But the slow rust had taught me patience, the quiet detonation had taught me courage, and the ledger of loss had taught me clarity. I understood, finally, that love without respect is not love, it is a cage. And cages are not meant for those who build them to give. They are meant for those who accept their boundaries and acknowledge their value. Benjamin came over that afternoon carrying a small box of books Sophie had wanted. He looked tentative, careful. I hope we're on the right track now," he said softly. I nodded, placing my hand over his. "We are. But remember, this is a different kind of love. One that is not blind, not indebted, not dictated by fear or guilt. It's measured by respect." He swallowed, emotion catching in his throat. "I understand, truly." Days turned into weeks. The house that Vivian had so meticulously planned, the luxury suites she had designed at my expense, began to sell. Benjamin made consistent repayments. Sophie spent Saturdays with me, sometimes overnight, baking, sewing, laughing, her small hands tracing patterns in dough and fabric, her voice carrying a joy that was once muted. I reclaimed the spaces of my life, the sewing room, the balcony, the kitchen that smelled like bread and lemon. I even painted again, the canvases scattered across my small apartment. Each stroke a reminder that my creativity, my energy, and my life were finally my own. I thought back to the jam, poured into the sink that first night I stopped giving. The memory made me smile faintly. It had been a symbol, yes, of anger but also of liberation. Each gesture of refusal, each boundary set, had been a step toward this life. A life not defined by their demands but by my own standards of respect and care. I sat on the balcony, cup in hand, Sophie's laughter echoing from inside. I whispered quietly to myself, a vow more than a statement. I will never again sacrifice myself for love that does not honor me. I will not allow my kindness to be exploited. I will choose peace over pain, boundaries over blind devotion, and self-respect over unrequited obligation. The final letters of repayment arrived. Benjamin had sent them without fuss, without complaint, a quiet acknowledgement of responsibility. The house had been sold. Vivian's ambitions, once so polished and imposing, had faltered without my contributions and without her partner's blind compliance. Justice had arrived quietly, deliberately, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I forgave Benjamin, truly, but I did not forget. And I would never again forget to love myself with the same fervor and care that I had once lavished entirely on others. That evening I sat at my window, Sophie asleep nearby, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. My hands rested on my knees. The house was quiet. My life, finally, was my own. I realized with a gentle sort of wonder that this was the love I had been searching for all along. A love that is clear, respectful, reciprocal, and free. A love that does not demand erasure or invisibility. For the first time, I was unburdened. My heart was not light. It was freer. The slow rust had been swept away, the detonation complete, and the peace earned was absolute. Closing thought narrator's monologue. Love is not the absence of boundaries. It is not the blind giving of oneself until nothing remains. True love respects, protects, and uplifts. I forgave my son. I reclaimed my life. And in doing so, I learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is the one you give to yourself. The balcony light glinted off the cup in my hands. I sipped my tea slowly, savoring not just its warmth, but the quiet certainty that I had survived, that I had reclaimed my dignity, and that the life ahead in pressured, unbound, and fully my own was a gift worth savoring. The long storm had ended. The reckoning had passed. The lesson was etched into every line of my hands, every stitch of fabric, every breath I took. I had chosen freedom, and in that choice, I had found the deepest peace of all. The story closes on a note of calm, reflective triumph. Justice has been served, boundaries enforced, love reclaimed. The narrator's journey from exploitation to liberation is complete, leaving the audience with both emotional satisfaction and moral resonance.